Right.
So Amber, we're recording. I'm going to turn it over to you for a welcome.
All right, let's do that.
All right.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Amber, and I am the Mountaineers Development Director. We are very excited to host a special Q&A session with Sir Chris Bonington this morning for our VIP Gala guests. As I'm sure you know, the Gala is our biggest fundraiser of the year. It raises over $400,000 to support our people, places, and books. Right now, the online auction is open for bidding, and I hope you check it out, especially if you're interested in other experiences or memorabilia or artwork from mountaineering legends such as Mountaineers books author Dee Molinar, Jim Whitaker, and Tom Hornbein. And on Thursday at 7, we have a live virtual gala for you. We promise that that's going to be fun and unique. Thank you very much for your support this year as we've undergone numerous gala changes. We really appreciate you. For this morning, we've got a couple of etiquette items. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that your name is the one displayed on your Zoom account this morning. This will help our moderator call on you if you have a question to ask. Please stay muted the entire morning. Our tech team is going to unmute you when it's your turn to ask a question. Today, we've got 6 individuals who sent in their questions ahead of time, and we're going to get through those first. And then when we have time at the end, we're going to take questions from the audience. You can let us know if you would like to ask a question by either using the raise hand function in Zoom or by leaving a comment in the comment box. With that, I want to give a really big thank you to Mountaineers CEO Tom Vogel, who is serving as this morning's tech guru and event co-host. And I also have the pleasure of introducing this morning's moderator, who's now going to take the reins, Roger Mellum. Roger serves on the executive committee of our Mountaineers Board of Directors. He is co-chair of this year's gala, and he is sincerely one of the most interesting people that I have ever met. So with that, Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amber. Sir Chris Bonington is one of the world's most amazing mountaineers. Almost 25 years ago, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his services to mountaineering. He did the first ascent of the Ogre in Pakistan, Kongar in China, Changabang in India, and was expedition leader for the first ascents of Annapurna's treacherous South Face in 1970, the biggest and most difficult climb in the Himalaya done at that time, and Everest Southwest Face in 1975. He was also the first Brit to climb the north face of the Eiger, and he's done innumerable other daring first ascents, including the Old Man of Hoy and the Central Pillar Frenay on Mount Blanc. He's a writer and photographer whose autobiography has been published by Mountaineers Books, and he's just a tremendous guy and a really kind person. My first question for you is, what made you more nervous? Repeating at age 80 your first ascent of the Old Man of Hoy, the tall sea stack on the coast of Scotland, or at age 81 getting remarried?
Well, I think getting remarried was the best thing, or one of the best things I ever did. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate. I've had 2 great loves in my life. My wife, Wendy, of 50 years, who brought up our children and put up with me being away from home 6 months of the year, practically through our entire married lives. But we had a rich and wonderful relationship, and that was very special. And then, though, when I tragically lost Wendy and went off to climb the Old Man of Hoy, and it was actually a great friend of mine, Leo Holding, who was the youngest person ever to have climbed the Old Man of Hoy, and it was him that came up with the idea. And I think it was as much as anything to actually help me through my grief, to actually go and climb the Old Man of Hoy again. So that was, that was serendipitous and wonderful.
I had no idea that they were so linked.
Oh yes, so everything in life is linked,
Everything's linked, isn't it?
isn't it? Hmm.
So is Lindsay Hartford on? I don't see her name here on the list of participants and who is teed up to ask you the first question.
I haven't seen her yet, Roger, so maybe we'll
So
go to Rich.
I'll go to Rich.
Okay.
Rich, are you ready to ask a question?
Yeah, so I should be unmuted now. Hi, Chris. This is Rich
Hi
Draves.
there, good to talk to you.
So my question is, how do you think about the feats of modern climbers? Whatever, how you want to define modern climbers, but what feats of modern climbing most impress you, given all of your experiences we just heard about? And then, kind of as a follow-on to that, what advice would you give to aspiring or ambitious young climbers? How should they manage risk as they try to, make it for themselves, whether they're motivated by fame and glory or, trying to establish professional careers in climbing?
Well, I think we'll try to. So wait a minute, what was the first question? Do it one at a time.
So the first question was about what feats of modern climbing most impress you?
I think in some ways, actually, one of the incredibly impressive feats was my good friend Leo Holding, when in fact in Antarctica, he went off and tried to find this mountain called the Spectre, which wasn't the biggest mountain in Antarctica, but it was certainly the most distant away from any other place. But the important thing was that he climbed it, or attempted the entire expedition in the purest possible kind of way, and at the same time managed to give a really good account of how he did it and what he did. So I think that was a fight, that impressed me immensely. The second question was?
What advice would you give to, aspiring climbers, people who want to be the next Leo Holding? How should they manage risk as they try to one-up each other and in the pursuit of fame and glory?
Well, there's two things really. I mean, we go climbing because we like risk. And it's then everyone, though, has different kind of risk kind of acceptances. If you like, I mean, I've got a very high risk acceptance. I mean, there's at least 10 occasions when it was a miracle I didn't get killed. So I've taken a load of risks and I'm lucky. And I think what you've got to do, you've got to realize that, yeah, you're climbing because you enjoy risk, but then everyone's got a different kind of level of risk they want to take. And I think to get the most out of climbing, and out of life to a degree, is that you've got to be prepared to take those risks, but you choose the level of risk you want to take. And as far as your chances of survival go, quite honestly, I think it's just, at the end of the day, it's not how careful you were or how good you were, it's how lucky you are. And survival is a matter of luck. That answers it.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thanks for your questions, Rich. Is Garth Jacobson on the line?
Actually, Roger, Lindsay is on now, so maybe we go to her.
Okay, fine. Hi, Lindsay. Glad you made it on. It's your turn to ask a question now.
Hi, Chris. It's Lindsay here. Sorry, there were technical difficulties earlier. Chris, my husband and I have just come to live in Seattle to be near family, but in England we live in Thornthwaite, near Keswick, which I'm sure you know well. I'm wondering, this is a completely different question from the last one, what your favourite Northwest Lakes mountain is. I'll tell you mine. Mine is Campbell's, a small mountain. I love it because of its name, its beautiful shapely profile above Derwentwater, and the fact that it's been the venue for so many family adventures over the years. It's got our history of our family built into it. Do you have a favourite mountain?
I just empathise so well with that. Yeah, it's a delight to talk to you. Well enough, no, Campbell's. I love Campbell's. I think I've walked it about half a dozen times, including on 2 occasions actually with my daughter-in-law's school. She's a school teacher, and in a small primary school near Aspatria, and taking a bunch of kids over cat bells is a sheer delight. And sharing in young people's kind of sense of adventure as they do it. But as far as I'm concerned, my home is actually on the other side of the Northern Fells, which is this big area of lovely rolling hills just to the north of Keswick. And my favorite walk, and one of my favorite views as well from a distance, is looking actually up at Skiddaw, which is one of the 3,000-foot mountains of the Lake District. And I think it's the most beautiful shape. Whatever direction you look at Skiddaw, it's got a fine shape to it. And there's a horseshoe, and going up this kind of horseshoe route on Skiddaw is my favorite walk. It's a lovely walk, and if you're sitting back from it, it's a gorgeous view as well. So yes, that brings me many, many kind of lovely associations.
I'm glad you like that. We have a view of that from our cottage in Thornthwaite. So next time I look at it, I'll think about you.
Oh, so I'll think of you too.
Hello.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate your question. So Garth Jacobson, you're next. And first tell us what the screenshot you have there behind you. What is that?
That's actually up in Lake Louise in Banff. A great place to go ice climbing.
Right.
I've walked around Lake Louise.
It's beautiful.
Well, I think it was something to do with Mountaineers I was up for. No, it was a Banff Mountain Festival. Yeah.
Exactly. I must say I'm a great fan of yours and read, some of your books and watched your movie and read books about you. And according to the movie, you said the greatest climbing enjoyment was shiveling the Southeast Ridge. Would you say that the ogre was the most courageous when you brought Doug Scott down with 2 broken legs and you had cracked ribs? On the ogre, apparently Doug Scott said he would not have survived without your great climbing skills. So my question is, was that your most courageous? And would you say Annapurna was the most amazing, or was it Everest? Or maybe if you could just comment about some of those great climbs you made.
I think for a start, I don't think you're being courageous doing something you love doing and you're attracted by. And when you get into a crisis, if you like, certainly the ogre was probably the most serious crisis in many ways, and certainly the most long drawn out. I mean, it ended up with 5 days without anything to eat and everything else. But we were totally focused and concentrated on actually surviving that situation. So that wasn't courage, that is just survival. And you hadn't got time to be frightened. I suppose the worst time for me was when we were trapped by bad weather. I'd had that fall and broken my ribs, and I knew they were broken. And I knew as well, I was coughing up blood, that if we didn't get down fairly soon from that situation, I'd probably die. And I just concentrated on staying alive. And it was just a focus on a survival, personal survival, more than anything else.
Could you comment on the Annapurna and Everest as your greatest adventure?
Well, they were each way. They were different adventures. Annapurna South Face was a huge challenge. There's no doubt about that at all. And it was also, for me, it was the first expedition that I'd actually ever led. And it came to take place. It was 1970. We were living actually not in the Lake District at that time, but in a place called Bowden, which is a small suburb of Manchester. And there's a little group of us who all settled in much the same area, within 4 or 5 miles of each other. It was a good place to be. It's the edge of the Peak District, so we get out climbing every afternoon. And we talked about getting into the mountains and having an expedition. In those days, it was a period of time when there'd been a series of wars in both the Indo-Pakistan War, and then the Indo-Chinese War. And so the Himalayas were shut. You couldn't get into the Himalayas at all. And the Himalayas were opened up in 1969. And then suddenly we could actually do something. And because we were all just talking about it, nobody did anything. And then a friend of mine sent me a photograph of the south face of Annapurna. And so I thought, well, let's get it done. And so I took on the role of leader of that expedition, which was, you know, the start of leading a series of expeditions. And I found that I was good at it. And certainly I learned a lot on the south face of Annapurna, made lots of mistakes. And I think one of the big things is you should never be afraid of making mistakes. We all make mistakes. And in actual fact, making mistakes is a learning process. And you learn from those mistakes to do it better and cleverer next time. And that meant when the chance came for the southwest face of Everest, which was the, you know, it still was a huge challenge and problem. But I was ready for that. And so that I could go. So each thing you did was leading you on to the next thing and gave you the experience that you could actually deal with it. I think the two things, the most important thing I learned was that, in actual fact, I don't think you should ever accept the word failure, because failure is something where, yeah, it didn't work. It's a learning process. And therefore, you've got to have failures to actually move on. And the important thing is to know how to move on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Garth, for your questions. Rocky Johnson, are you ready to ask a question?
Yeah, I am. For some reason, my video just won't kick on, but I'll go ahead anyway.
All right.
Good talk to Rocky anyway.
Oh, this is great. I've admired you for over 60 years. I really enjoyed watching on an early American television sports show your video of the Old Man of Hoy along with Tom Petty. And I was wondering, did the producers and the people putting that show on ask you to grimace more or do heroic things to make it look better for television?
Well, no, one actually happened with the Old Man of Hoy. When we went off to do the Old Man of Hoy, it was in 1966, then there was no television or anything was involved. It was a great friend of mine, Tom Petty, who phoned me and suggested we went and did it. And once again, for me, it was another repetition of what things happened in your life, in the sense that I had actually just lost my my first son, my youngest son, Conrad. And at the time I'd been abroad, I'd been in South America doing, in fact, my first ever kind of photojournalistic assignment. And my wife and little Conrad were up staying with some friends of ours in Scotland. And he wandered off into the garden, and my wife was actually preparing. She was a very good singer, and she was preparing for her first professional engagement. And it was a house where you could be absolutely safe. There was a big garden, little tiny brook at the bottom of it. And Conrad drifted away from the others. He was an adventurous little soul. He's just nearly 3. And he fell into a stream and was drowned. And the grief of that, I still find it difficult to talk about. But it was actually Tom who was going to help me out of it. And he phoned up about a month later and said, look, I've got this wonderful sea stack. He was one of the great kind of mountain explorers of Britain. He had the largest in distance and the smallest in numbers of patients in the far north of Scotland. And he said, look, it was the Old Man of Hoy and it hadn't been climbed, would you like to come and join us? So really going for the Old Man of Hoy was an escape from that. And then therefore there's no complications, so getting back to the story, there's no complications at all of media kind of involvement. So the three of us, there's Rusty Bailey, who lives in America now, myself and Tom climbed it. It was fun, it was exciting, it was stretching, it was brilliant. And then the next year, it got about as a big challenge. And it was Tom actually that talked to Chris Brasher, who was the head of broadcasting, the British Broadcasting Association at that time. And he therefore set up the great TV extravaganza of repeating the Old Man of Hoy. So that was brilliant fun, and more people were involved. There were 6 of us all together on the Old Man of Hoy then. There was myself and Tom Patey doing our original route. There was Joe Brown, one of the other great climbers that Britain's produced, and Ian McDonald Davis, who was basically, he became the great TV climber. He's a great extrovert. And in actual fact, he was married to my dear wife of today, Loretto, and Mac was one of my oldest friends anyway. So we entered that. That was a TV enterprise, and that was what it was for, and it was fun. So in no way did it kind of in shadow the purity of our first ascent. It was just making absolutely the most of the media and everything else and thoroughly enjoying it. So there was no conflict. It was brilliant.
Oh, that's a great story. Thank you.
That was a great story. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rocky. Jerry, Logan, it's your turn to ask a question.
Good morning, sir. A two-parter for you, sir, if I could. If you would talk about Don Willens and your relationship with him a little bit in your early climbing years, and then also, is it RAF or British Royal Army where your allegiance lies now?
Sorry about the first one, RAF or?
The British Royal Army and your Sandhurst and things.
Oh. It was no, basically, no, I had the early part of my life and career was a series of kind of mistakes and things where I took the wrong course and then readjusted. So it started off, I was actually in the RAF, and that was caused by a disaster, or what seemed to be a major disaster at that time. I was going to university. I was quite academic. I had a place at University College London, which was one of our top universities, and everything was absolutely clear and wonderful. And then I failed in one subject of my A-levels which you needed to get into university. And because of that, I couldn't go to university, which at the time I thought was a total, absolute disaster. And so I went off. In those days, you had national service, so everyone was called up. And so I chose to go into the Royal Air Force simply because I thought I could get into mountain rescue and spend my 2 years actually kind of, rescuing people in the mountains. And then because I'd been to a public school, and in England, public schools are private schools, and therefore they automatically put me up for applying for a commission. And so, and in that, I thought by this time I quite liked the service life anyway. So I decided I would actually apply for a commission, and it was the Royal Air Force. And so they immediately asked, well, don't you want to fly? Well, I'd never really thought of flying because I knew instinctively I've got absolutely no spatial awareness, never have had, and I'm completely mechanically impractical. But I thought, oh, well, I got through the aptitude test, so I went for it. So I failed there because when you started trying to fly a plane, I think you were meant to be able to go fly solo after about 7 hours. And after 17 hours, I still wasn't safe. So that was the end of my first attempt at a career. And then after that, it just followed. I was never thought I'd want to make. I'd been an instructor at the Army Outward Bound School, and I knew I wasn't a guide. I like to climb to the absolute limit, totally selfishly, for myself and the mates with whom I'm climbing. And so I decided, so I forget where I was now. So that was yet another failure, but I left the army, I'd left this, tried for a proper job, and I was working for Unilever, and that was when I discovered climbing, and I went from there. Now, the other question was, well, it's all.
Oh, your friend Don Willens, your relationship with him, if you would discuss.
Well, with Don, and Don fitted into that very tidily, because Don and I had got to know each other in our kind of climbing days, and Don and I, we formed a very, very strong climbing partnership over some of my earliest hard climbs, Central Pillar of Frene and so on, and in Patagonia. And Don was, he was very, very tough. He was single-minded. He was very fixed in his kind of beliefs and ways, and came from very different. I mean, he was very much working class background. I, of course, was more of a kind of middle class kind of background. But we got on together. We got on superbly well together on the mountain. And Don, I think of all the people I've ever climbed with, he had the best mountain judgment that I've ever come across. And we teamed up well. As technically, he was better than me. He was absolutely brilliant, but I was good. I was very nearly good. We had a very even kind of relationship in that way. And the thing that really damaged our relationship was when we'd spent the whole of the summer of 1961 doing a whole series of great climbs, trying to make the first British descent to the north wall of the Eiger. And then right at the end, and then 1962 was the same, and right at the end of that summer, we've been climbing, and we'd done some good climbs, but we hadn't got up the Eiger. It was bad conditions. And so Don had so he had to go home. The weather was perfect when we got to Chamonix, which is just below Mont Blanc. And I thought, well, I'll just spend a few more days in Chamonix, make the most of the weather. So Don had gone home. I was climbing with Ian Clough, who was a young climber with whom we climbed the Central Pillar of Frene with in 1961, and he was around. And we decided we'd get just one more climb in. And so we did it. We did the Walker Spur of the Grand Ras, which is one of the great kind of mountain classics of the Alps. And we were both at the end of a climbing season, climbed incredibly well, incredibly fast together, got to the top of the Walker Spur, and the weather was so good, and the climb was so good. Instead of going down, as one normally would do, we did we just bivouacked on top of the Geras, and then the next day we did this huge long traverse back to the Torino hut. And it was during that traverse that I realized we were going better than we ever could have gone, and the weather was perfect. The Eiger must be in condition. And so 2 days later, we did the north wall of the Eiger, and we creamed up it. And Don never forgave me for that. And I felt I was justified, because the previous year in 1961, when we'd done the Central Pillar of Frene, I was very unfit climbing-wise, so I'd just traveled overland back from climbing, making the first set of Nuptse, and I hadn't done any proper climbing for ages. And so I therefore decided to do one test climb with Ian before we went for the Central Pillar of Frene. And during that time, the weather had been perfect, and Don, with this Polish guy we're climbing with, went for the Central Pillar of Frene. So he would have happily left me behind on that one. So I felt I was justified. So our relationship never really recovered from that. But when it came to the south face of Annapurna, once again, I mean, Don by that time, he was off his best. He was only interested in doing routes that he passionately wanted to do, and he'd lost interest in alpine climbing. And he was definitely outfitted. He's very, very fond of quantities of beer and also fish and chips. And so I actually went up, and I without having told him what I was checking him out for, would he be okay for the south to face of Annapurna? We went and had a weekend's climbing, and it was interesting. The first day was with Tom Patey, and the first two pitches, we made the first winter ascent or something, and he was quite happy to remain second. And then the final pitch, which was particularly hard, it was a nasty icy groove, and his ear, well, I think it's about my turn now. And he just drifted up it. And I saw, no, Don still has the genius. And I invited him to go. And he was my deputy leader on the South Face of Annapurna. But once again, he was difficult, my goodness. But his very abrasion actually pushed people into doing what they did. And the success on the South Face of Annapurna was almost miraculous. So, I mean, when Don Willems and Dougal Haston made their push for the summit, I mean, they say it's about a 2,000-meter push on a big mountain in bad conditions, and they pulled it off. So that opened all that up. But Don, and then Don, my relationship never really recovered though, but we slowly, right at the end, we did a television thing together, and I remember sitting on the top of a crag after we'd done it, and that we buried the hatchet basically, and it's so important to be able to do that. It's so sad if you lose a friendship basically. So that's the story.
Awesome, thank
But
you.
he was an amazing guy.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Chris. This conversation is becoming more interesting by the minute. I really appreciate your being so open with us. It's really great, Sir Chris. We'll now turn to John Olson for your question.
Chris, I'm really happy to meet your acquaintance. I'm on the board of directors of the Mountaineers. I've been climbing since the mid-'60s, so I have many years to read of your exploits and hear about things that I never was able to do for a variety of reasons. But in any event, I currently instruct in our climbing courses. And one of the things that we address in our climbing courses is safety and risk. And in the same vein as Rich Draves had asked you earlier about risk, so I had to change my question around from my original one, so I'll modify it. And what I'd like to ask you about is two things. The first one is, if you were in front of a group of new climbers that are certainly within their first year of climbing experience, what is the one thing that you would feel you could help them relate to this concept of choosing your risk, so that there's something they can kind of nail on the wall and try not to do or try to do? And the second question is also for aspiring leaders. What advice would you give to try to make the concept of choosing risk something explicit that they can really grab hold of? Those of us that have been climbing for years, and I never climbed at your level, but you learn this somewhat abstract thing by a number of concrete mistakes one makes. And what we'd like to do is, just like with our children, try to keep making the same mistakes that we made. And many of us are not very successful at that with children. I oftentimes have been in front of a course talking about climbing risk, and I feel like I'm talking to my kids about something with their eyes rolling back in their heads and hard for them to relate. So what I'm looking for is, how can you get new people to relate to a specific thing when they're first learning to climb? And the second is leaders as they're aspiring to be leaders. The one thing that the pearl of wisdom that they could perhaps nail on the wall and remember?
I think the most, well, firstly, I think it's listen to your instinct. In other words, if you're about to go in, whatever you're going in to do, so you're going on an adventure, and whether it's a young person going off to try to climb a hill for the first time, and it might be a modest little hill or whatever it happens to be, but it's actually being aware of your instinct. And if you have a sense of doubt about something, it's listen to that doubt. And I think if you feel that something is wrong, you actually, at that point, that is what's saying, maybe this is not where you should be at the moment, and then not go with it. And sometimes you've got either the people around you are all gung-ho and happy or what have you, but you say, well, no, I'm not happy about this. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think at times it means that, yeah, you might say, well, I'm not going to leave you guys. I'm not happy about this. I'm going to pull out. So I think that's one of the key things about it, is just having that instinctive feel about it and follow that instinct.
Thank you very much.
And I think that answers both sides of the question.
Yes.
So thanks a lot. We have 7 or 8 minutes left, and so Tom Vogel will now take over. And there are some people who have asked questions in the chat, and so Tom will relay those questions now. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to moderate this discussion with you. It's been wonderful that you decided to do this for us, and we're looking forward, hopefully, to seeing you in person at our 2022 Gala.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that, very, very definitely. And funnily enough, for 22, I'm going to make absolutely certain that I've got plenty of time after the Gala, so I can then actually rent a car and we can actually drive down. We've got so many friends, both in Washington State and then down into Utah and California. And we'll be spending quite a few weeks catching up with old friends, doing a little bit of modest climbing, lots of walking, and mainly seeing good friends.
Oh, that's great. All right.
So just as a logistical reminder, folks can type into the chat box to ask a question, or if you want to use the raise hand feature, we'll call on you as well. But the first question is from Sally Kench. And Chris, Sally asks, what experiences as a child influenced you to take risks and to love the mountains?
Well, I think I've always been adventurous. I can vaguely remember the incident, but I was told about it later. And I must have been about 4 or 5 at the time. And we were living in a suburb of London called Hampstead, which if you have to live in London, it's the place to live, because it's got Hampstead Heath, which is the closest thing you've got to wilderness, actually within 5 miles of the centre of London. And we had my mum lived in a flat, an apartment, a downstairs apartment, and we had a back garden, and there was a gate from the back garden going straight out onto Hampstead Heath. And I and a little girlfriend, I think there must have been about 4 or 5, got out of the garden and went walkabout on Hampstead Heath. And of course, my grandmother, who actually, my mum was single parent, so she was out working. My grandmother looked after us, and she called the police and everything else. And finally, we were found, taken back to the local police station, and there they made the big mistake of leaving us in the inspector's room office while they were trying to find our parents and my grandmother. And I got into the refrigerator and found a bottle of milk I didn't drink the milk. I just poured it all over the inspector's desk with his papers and everything. So that's where my sense of adventure started. And then I was also, I had to, when I was a tiny bit old, I'd have been about 7 at the beginning of the Second World War. And my mum wanted to get me out of London. So she sent me to a little boarding school in the Lake District. And so I was sent to this school, and I was very happy there. I liked it, but I liked escaping. And this was my first bit of leadership as well. I persuaded 4 of my fellow youngsters to actually make a big escape, and we planned it all out very carefully. And what empathized me with it was my father had been actually, he was a courageous man himself. He was a founder member of the Special Air Service, and their first operation was a complete disaster, and all the planes were shot down. They were meant to be parachuted down behind enemy lines. And he spent the rest of the war in a German prisoner of war camp. And so this made the escape even more purposeful. So we secreted all our supplies. And I remember I pinched, there was a beautiful, a fruit loaf. This was days of rationing and everything else. And the headmistress, no doubt, was going to have some parents coming to tea. And we stole all this food, and then we left at about midday, and we walked about 5 or 6 miles away from the school and spent the rest of the afternoon playing by a stream. And then it was getting late, and we said, oh, what are we going to do now? We did think of trying to sleep in trees because of wild animals, but it's not very easy to sleep in a tree. And we were just tailing it back, walking back to school, when the headmistress, who had a little Morris Minor, found us and we were hauled back to school. So that was, I was an adventurer and always have been. And I think perhaps actually that was my first leadership role. It all went from there.
Well, on the topic of leadership, Chris, the next question is from another Hartford. This is from Chloe Hartford, and she asks, who inspired you as a leader, and what do you think makes a great leader in the mountains and beyond?
Well, I think one of my great mentors, in actual fact, was John Hunt. And of course, Colonel, as he was then, John Hunt, was the person who was selected to lead the British Everest expedition that made the first ascent of Everest in 1953. And John Hunt went on, of course, to had a long and distinguished career. He became Lord Hunt. He was a life peer. And he was a major figure in that direction. And so he became a friend. He was my patron on several of my expeditions, or sat on my board committees, board of management and so on. And so he became a friend as well as a mentor. And I think what I learned from him was how important it was, firstly, to be absolutely clear in your vision about what you want to achieve. And secondly, the way he consulted people. He was very aware. He got the opinions of the members of his team, but then very importantly as well, when it came to the decisions and the final decisions, he made clear-cut, firm decisions. In other words, you don't run something by committee, but you actually do make sure that the team, your group of people who are working with you have been consulted as well. So that he became, to me, he became a great friend, a mentor, and he was one of the great leaders and someone that I learned a huge amount from.
Thanks for that. Jerry Logan has another question for you, and this one's about your association with Mountain Wilderness. And he asks, is this the organization you are associated with now that you would recommend we learn about, or is there another that you're particularly fond of?
I think Mountain Wilderness, yeah, I'm privileged and proud to be a member of Mountain Wilderness, and I've got, they are amongst the many kind of organizations that seeking to help us yeah, save our planet basically. And I think when you look at what's happened, I mean, today with coronavirus, and I think coronavirus in a way is nature's real wake-up call to us. And it's to say, you've got to do something about your planet. And the trouble is, coronavirus, okay, it's by the look of it, it's always going to be with us a bit, but it'll be contained, and these things always can be contained. But what can't be contained, what can't be stopped, is the actual effects of global warming. And they are happening, and unless we do something about them now to slow down the process of global warming, I'll be all right, I'll be dead and gone. You'll probably be all right. But our children, our grandchildren, again, to face the appalling things that could happen with uncontrolled global warming. And so I think the wake-up call is for us to start looking at it. And the worrying factor there is that to slow down global warming, it has got to be every country in the world that gets behind it. So it means that the leaders in the world have got to get behind it. And I think the worrying thing here is, you look at your own country, United States, you look at India, you look at China, none of these countries are prepared to take the drastic steps that are needed to slow it down. And therefore, I think it's very worrying.
Chris, do you think there's anything that we as individuals, especially as members of an organization like the Mountaineers that is so connected to the outdoors, should be doing to address global climate change?
I think all we can do is do it by our own personal example. And there are some big questions. For instance, one could argue that, okay, flying off and to go and do all these things by plane, and us flying to Nepal to go trekking or climbing mountains or what have you. But the trouble, and I think, in fact, we still need to go on doing those things. If we just sink back into ourselves, and even that, for instance, the people of Nepal, for instance, desperately need tourism to actually keep going. It's a matter of getting, and I think this is where we have all got to start modifying our actions and being more aware of our actions. And I think that's in our own small way we can do that. At the same time, I hope I can continue going flying to Nepal and actually going trekking and walking and doing things with my wonderful Sherpa friends. And I think it's just it's moderation is what we need.
Great. We have a couple more questions and maybe you have time for 2 or 3 more. The next one is sort of more of a fun question for you. This is from Lorna Corrigan, and she said that she, a few years ago, attended a wonderful, hilarious session with Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner. I might have botched her name. I apologize for that. In which she giddily described the rewards at the end of a climb of consuming copious amounts of boiled potatoes. Do you have any particular food or beverage cravings on expeditions that you satisfy on return?
I think I've dreamt very often of, I realize one shouldn't eat too much red meat, but I do love a really, really good kind of steak, very, very tender, very almost raw. And I also, and it should be washed down with very, very good red wine.
That's great. I'll join you on both of those. Our next question, and we probably have time for about 1 or 2 more after this. So if there's any others, feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand. And this one is from Helen Chirulo, who mentioned that she was our publisher until just recently. And her question is that you've got a splendid bookshelf behind you. Can you recommend 3 to 5 books that influenced your life?
Oh gosh, I think. Well, I'm just trying to. Oh no, I'm terribly bad at remembering names. I think one of the first book was. Oh no, what was it called? You know, my memory's gone completely on those. But I think that there are various books that really did influence you. What was it? No, but the memory of the day has just completely left me.
No worries. Let's see. Another question from Sally Kench. Why haven't we asked about you, or what haven't we asked about you that you would like to talk about?
Oh, well, I think we've talked about just about everything in actual fact. I can't think of anything more, really. I think we've covered most of the things. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, basically.
We have too. Let's see. We got one more here. Let's see. Actually, a couple more here. From Garth Jacobson, he said that you said your greatest climbing enjoyment was Shivling Southeast Ridge. Why was that so much fun?
Oh, Shivling, it was the most wonderful trip I've ever had. And I think it had, to me, everything about it. It was completely spontaneous. And it was also very opportunist. And essentially, I get invited to these mountain kind of conferences and festivals. And this was one that was being held up in Darjeeling. And they also, I said that I'd come, but I'd like to bring my climbing partner out with me as well. And there's a guy called Jim Fotheringham, who I've done some of my best climbs with. He's our local dentist here in Cumbria. And so the two of us went out to this conference because at the end of it, we knew there was going to be a trip into the Himalayas, and to actually do basically to go and visit some places or what have you. So we accepted that, and then we set out. We didn't really know what we were going to do, but I'd taken the precaution of getting permission to tackle a mountain called Kednap Dome. And so we trekked in to see. So there was us, and there was also a group of our fellow conference goers, which actually contains, there was Wanda Lomoskiewicz, who of course a brilliant female climber. There was Barry Bishop, who is an American climber. I think he'd been in the CIA. And there's someone, and there's a guy who'd made the first Canadian ascent of Everest. So we had these very distinguished people coming in with us. And then when we arrived there, our objective, Kednap Dome, was a long day's trek. And so we had these distinguished mountaineers acting as our porters, helping carry us all our gear in. And we arrived at the foot of the west face of Kednap Dome. We took one look at it, and it's a bit like two Yosemites, piled one on top of the other. And Jim and I, we had neither the equipment nor, in actual fact, the desire to try to climb that. Realized it was miles too difficult. By this time, our support team had gone, and we did spend a day looking at it and decided, no, we can't do this. And then so we turned around and we'd abandoned it. And we went back down. And as you went back down the valley, Shivling is actually at the side of it. And that wasn't even our objective or anything. We hadn't got permission to climb it then. And we thought, well, God, we'll go and do it. And so it was completely spontaneous. And we went up, we had a limited amount of time. We went up one evening, we just trekked up the approach a bit to see if we could see a way of starting it, and we thought we did. And then the next day we saw there was a gully that went through and past the bottom crags, and we could see it was dangerous, but we reckoned we could get out of the way quickly. So we went and climbed it. Oh shit, wait a minute. I'll switch that off. And we then.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Dylan from Triutility. I'm hoping you can help me out. I'm looking to speak to who's dealing with the energy management over there for you guys now.
I'm sorry, no, I can't. I'm busy at the moment.
Right, not a worries. Do you know when's perhaps going to be a better time to catch them?
I've got this phone system that drives me round the bend. I think that's got to happen. Where were we? Oh yeah, shivling. So we ended up, we were 4 days up, and we had a tiny little lightweight tent. Actually, our last camp was just below the summit, and the summit was the perfect summit. It was a very, very narrow ridge, and on the top, there was only room for one person to be there at a time. And we realized, having done that in those 4 days, there's no way we could reverse the route safely. And we knew there was a way down the other side, but we didn't know anything about it. So 4 days up, we then went down and we found a way down. It was an epic all the way, and we climbed it. And that, to me, that was the best. It has everything, to me, what adventure is all about. Spontaneous, unplanned, and joyful. And that's what it was.
And of course, you live to tell about it too, which is always an important part.
Yes.
Chris, we have time for just 2 more quick questions, and then we're going to wrap up to be respectful of your time. But this has been wonderful. The first quick question is from again from Chloe Harford, and she says that growing up she would carry Kendall mint cake as one of her 10 essentials in the Lake District. Do you carry that, or do you have another special treat that you reward yourself as a summit food?
Well, a Kendall mint cake is great, but it is so sugary and so sweet. You can't really eat it below 6,000 meters. And of course, the only other problem with it, it is just about pure sugar. So it'll give you an instant boost that dies out very quickly. But no, I have used Kendall mint cake.
And do you have a special summit food that you like other than Kendall mint cake?
I think, well, I try these days when I go into the Himalayas, I eat the local food. I think dal bhat. In fact, we had dal bhat for lunch today, but dal bhat is wonderful, which is basically lentils and rice, and I can live on that. So that's my good standard food in the Himalayas.
Terrific. Well, our final question is from Lorna Corrigan, and it is: what adventures do you foresee in the next decade?
Well, in the next 10 years, so in 10 years' time, well, I'll be a youthful 96. I'm still, fairly fit. I still love walking. We get out walking. My balance is absolutely dreadful. I damaged my back when I did the Old Man of Hoy when I was 80. And but it is just basically to go on doing what we're doing. Is I suppose we're very privileged. We're lucky. We've got a house up here in the Lake District where we are now. We've got a house in London. We've got a house in France, and hopefully, if we can go on affording our houses and drifting in between them, I think I just look forward to being as active as I can and enjoying life.
That sounds lovely, Chris. I want to pass it back to Amber to wrap up, but we've really enjoyed having you this morning. Thanks so much.
It's been great talking to you as well. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have not much to add, but an echo of gratitude, Chris, for your time here today. And I want to extend that gratitude to everybody on the call. Thank you very much for your wonderful support of the Mountaineers. We appreciate you so much. We have recorded this, so in case you'd like to watch again and hear back anything you missed, we'll be sure to send it out to you. And if you have any questions leading up to this Thursday's gala, please feel free to get a hold of me directly. We'd be happy to answer anything you want to know. Chris, until 2022, we hope you stay healthy and happy and safe, and we are so excited to see you soon.
And I look forward to coming to see you in 2 years' time, and that will be absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Our fingers are tightly crossed, Chris.
Very, very crossed.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Cheers.